Welcome back, book people. We have a really unusual book today. This is a first novel. This writer is well known, Alexandra Fuller, from her autobiography. I think she wrote 4 different volumes of growing up in a rather eccentric family in Rhodesia. I read them all, so I was familiar with her, and then I saw this book reviewed, and it said it's her first novel. I didn't realize she had never written a novel before. She is an extremely unusual woman, very singular. I'm going to take a look now at her appearance at Politics and Prose, so you have a picture of her in your head.
The great gift for me was that I rode onto the res with 400 Lakota Indians, and I had my ass handed to me. I am a rider. I can endure. Those people are beyond. And I thought, I'm riding with people who are in training. I mean, talk about the meek shall inherit the earth. There were children on horses with nothing but a little bit of baling twine between the mouth and the horse they were on. 400 Indians, we rode 200 miles. I had blisters down my body. I arrived on the res on my knees, reduced and humbled and grateful, and exactly as a white settler should arrive in an indigenous community.
Let me talk a minute about the title, because you may be wondering, Quiet Until the Thaw. This comes from a Native American poem, and it centers on the names that Native Americans give their children. And if you have read the book, you will know this plays a very big part as we go through the book. It brings a lot of humor, shows how misunderstandings come about, the names that Native Americans give each other. I want to speak a little about Alexandra Fuller, because this is another issue. There's a lot of intricate issues with this book. How she came to write it. She immersed herself. She was on assignment for a magazine. She immersed herself in Rez, R-E-Z. That's how we're going to refer to it from now on, life. 3 months she lived with the Lakotas. I believe that is Nebraska or North Dakota, but anyway, she lived with them. And then resulted from that a magazine article, and after that she thought, this can only be told in fiction so that I can interject myself. And that was the genesis of this book. She wrote the novel because she wanted to tell the story of people who have been pushed aside in the name of progress in quotes. She wanted to tell their story, and this she did, I think, very, very skillfully. She even got in what we saw, I think it was about a year ago, on TV every night, the protests against the oil pipeline going under the water. All of this, she got into the novel, and it helps us understand what's going on.
Being able to mobilize so fast.
Last time the people went out, the state police reacted with violence. They reacted with all their military machines. So we went out, we stopped the construction for the day, the workers returned back to Mandan, the welders left the site, we were able to mobilize the whole camp. Probably at least 500 people or more left today, and we stopped DAPL for the day. And we went around our 20-mile boundary. We have a buffer zone, 20 miles on each side of the river, so today we drove around that boundary and made sure they weren't working within there. And we also stopped construction for the day peacefully. Nobody was arrested. There was no violence. No one went to jail. So it was a good day for the people today.
Just one baby step. We shut down 5 sites today. 5.
It's a beautiful day. No matter what, we always count our victories. And today, Dakota Access workers fled the scene because they saw the numbers that we had.
And I want to thank everyone for your fighting warrior spirit, for coming here to protect sacred water, to remember it, for remembering your ancestors. You all, everyone here is a prayer answered by your ancestors.
In the end, unfortunately, all these protests turned out to be really a show. Obama extended the ban on the pipeline. As we know, Trump got elected, swept it away. Pipeline is now down. She wanted to include this because your frustration starts to build. You know, when you see it, it's like they can never win, sort of. They're in a can't-win situation. There are some facts that I think are very important here. On the res, the average age of a male is 46 to 48 years, female 52 years. The average annual income is $4,000. That alone says a great deal. This is 2017. There are two characters in the book. From plot point, one views life positively, one negatively. One goes to jail, one stays on the res, and does all the right things that he can do to pass on his culture to children. So she's getting in the two different points of view. One of the really big themes of this, and these two characters represented, is the past is always present. That is something that she emphasizes in that book. I mean, it applies to everybody's life, but particularly Native Americans simply cannot ever get away from their past, unfortunately. Some of their tasks are Herculean. We would say, or Sisyphus. I mean, it is like pushing a stone up the mountain. No matter how hard the, in quotes, good character tries, works, teaches, it's usually pretty much hopeless. That's why I gave you those figures. $4,000 a year. I mean, this is a very hard way to live. And another theme that she pushes very much and wants us to understand is that their life, like ours, is cyclical. You go through cycles. You go through good, bad, and everything goes round in a circle. And she illustrates this with their lives. And their lives are so contained on these small reservations. And basically, it was land given to them that nobody ever wanted. And if they discovered oil on it or something, they mostly managed to take it away from them. To illustrate these points, I want to read you a passage from the book. Her writing says it all. And we see the ripple effect of that tension on the generations to follow. One common myth about the res dispelled. People who don't know the res say it's a complicated place. They're confused by what they do not understand. The res is not a complicated place. It's an essential place. Essential, meaning there is nothing more that can be taken away, removed, or forgotten. Essential, meaning there remains only what is absolutely necessary. Essential, meaning it doesn't get more real than this. This is a pretty serious subject, and I take it seriously. There was a film made a few years ago called Smoke Signals. Sherman Alexie, very good writer, wrote it. We're going to see now a small piece of that film. It will make you laugh, but it will make you cry, and it will internally tell you where we are.
From tribal meteorologist Lester Falls Apart, and I just received a request from Irvin in DeSmet. He wants to hear a sad song.
We passed the stores, we passed the hotels, filled our car with gas, and then we drove that night. I saw the moon, almost got us in an accident.
Man, I love this song.
Then at the
Jesus,
rest
of every song. No, I mean it. I really love this song. Jeez, I'm thirsty. Give me a beer. Hey, girl, we don't drink no more, remember? That's right, innit? Oh, give me a Coke. Let's go, loosey-goosey. Have a Coke, hey? Hey, watch where you're going! Jeez! I'm watching where I'm going. Hey, that's Victor and Thomas.
Hey.
Hey, Victor. Sorry to hear about your dad. You need a ride?
Yeah.
Hey, Thomas. Need a ride?
You bet.
What are you gonna trade for it? We're Indians, remember? We barter.
A story?
It'll be good. Better be good.
During the 60s, Arnold Joseph was the perfect hippie because all the hippies were trying to be Indians anyway. But because of that, he was always wondering how anybody would know when an Indian was trying to make a social statement. But there's proof, you know. Back during the Vietnam War, he was demonstrating against it, and there was this photographer there. He took a picture of Arnold that day, and it made it onto the wire services and was reprinted in newspapers throughout the country. It even made it to the cover of Time magazine. In that photograph, Arnold is wearing bell-bottoms and a flowered shirt, his hair in braids with red peace symbols splashed across his face like war paint. He holds a rifle above his head, captured in that moment just before he proceeded to beat the shit out of the National Guard private lying on the ground beneath him. Another demonstrator holds a sign just barely visible over his left shoulder. It reads, "Make love, not war."
Jeez, did your dad really do that?
Thomas, you're so full of shit.
Oh, then what happened?
Arnold got arrested, you know, but he got lucky. At first, they charged him with attempted murder, but then they plea bargained that down to assault with a deadly weapon, and then they plea bargained that down to being an Indian in the 20th century. Then he got 2 years in Walla Walla.
So what do you think? Well, I think it's a fine example of the oral tradition.
But they're floating just above the land. We are floating. You're my road buddy, but I'm lonely all the time. I thought we'd show that friendship could be stronger than the crossroads devil, but I thought I heard the children sing. I'll take that thing you got from free. Now this is not a romance.
Did you guys got your passports?
Passports?
Yeah. You're leaving the res and you're going into a whole different country, cousin.
But it's the United States.
Damn right it is. That's as foreign as it gets. Hope you two got your vaccinations.
Bye, Victor!
So who is Alexandra Fuller? She's extremely attractive. I think she's 48 years old. Interesting story. She is the daughter of expats who left England when she was 3. She grew up in Rhodesia, and as you know, there was many problems there. They lived with guns in the house. There was civil war in Rhodesia. Her parents are still there. She left in her 20s, married an American, and moved to the United States. She will explain herself perfectly well if you will, after this, watch the Politics and Prose interview she did, which gives you a whole lot of information about her, and she herself is mesmerizing. She's as important as reading the book, I think. She has located herself in the west of the United States. She lives in a yurk in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Having grown up seeing people, African blacks, robbed of everything, the water, the resources, education, civil rights, she became, let's just say, a dedicated liberal person she's dedicated her life to the rights of others. But what is interesting is her parents are total right-wing racists, and she says it. And they believe in racism. So this is a very interesting woman. And she says, I love my parents. But she has dedicated herself to now the area she lives in. She saw all that she had grown up with in Africa replicated in Native Americans. Sorry, but we did the same thing. We took away the land, we took everything. We basically tried out some genocide. So she's just outraged about this. And therefore, we have the genesis of this book. Alexandra Fuller's position is, we take everything from Native people. We take the land, we take the water. She's seen the result of this in Africa. And she says Africa has paid a tremendous price for the way it treated their indigenous people. And I think we can all agree to that. Her question is, what about United States? What about America? And I'm going to include Canada too. I mean, we have recently in the news the terrible treatment the Canadians impose on their indigenous people. But we have not paid the price, not the way Africa has, and that is her question. She wants us aware. Alexandra Fuller did a very, very interesting interview on NPR, and I am going to now read a small quote from that to you. She said, "I think it's an essential thing if you're a white settler and you're taking on the stories of people who have been othered for so long, to remember it's not as if the whites came and just took the land. They took the land, the water, the power, but also the dominant narrative. And I'm deeply aware of that, deeply aware of that, because I have grown up in Zimbabwe, seeing how the dominant narrative throughout my childhood and for a long time afterwards was always white, even though the blacks outnumbered the whites at least 10 to 1. There's a very interesting issue that comes up with this book. Lionel Shriver, the expat American who lives in London, writer, was accused earlier this year when she wrote a story from the point of view of a young African woman. A young African female writer said, "You cannot write our story. This is bogus. How can a white woman living in London write the African American story?" Lionel Shriver had something to say.
Well, I gave a speech to open the Brisbane Writers' Festival, and I thought that most of my remarks were pretty anodyne. And in fact, I was a little worried that the speech was going to be boring. It must not be boring because in some ways it's still going on. Right. I mean, articles keep coming out, and I have so little time for the concept of cultural appropriation, meaning that as it applies to my occupation, it means that you don't have the right to assume that you know what it's like to be someone other than yourself, which is what fiction writers do.
Right. Fuller says she's aware of this sort of controversy, and she basically is not going to pay any attention to it because, after all, this is the job of writers, to write about experience. So it doesn't matter. Does that mean that I cannot write about the life of a 12-year-old because I'm not 12? No. So you understand. So Fuller is kind of brushing this aside, but it does come up again and again. You can't write our experience. And she says she respects that, but chooses to disregard that. This is a big issue. And so I'm going to take the time to read to you another quote from Alexandra Fuller on this subject. On balance, I had to weigh it up. What is worse here, my silence or my speaking out? If it further wounds and harms indigenous communities, then I've desperately failed. But really, the conversation I want to be having is with fellow white settlers. And that's what we are, white settlers. Not with the indigenous community. They already know their own story, and this will come back to haunt us. And this may well come back to haunt us. Thank you very much for joining me for the third Brainy Books. Next time, it'll be in 2 weeks, we're going to be with the great Richard Ford and his first nonfiction book, the story of his parents' marriage between them. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later. Bye.